Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we have another great episode of Kentucky History here. And joining me again is Mr. Jim Prichard. How you doing?
Very well. Hope you're doing well today.
Doing good. The rain has stopped for, I don't know, an hour maybe. Who knows? I've literally been mowing my yard, and I'm going through puddles. There's so much
Uh,
rain.
I've been on the same task myself. Sort of trying to mow and weed as much as I can between thunderstorms.
Yeah.
So, a little more work today, and I should be caught up until next time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it is just for people to know whenever you're listening to this, it is we're recording this in June, 2025. So it's been a rainy one. So,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
yeah. But we got us a good topic here. You've talked about this before. Cook's Devils, guerrilla warfare in northeastern Kentucky. So,
Northeastern
uh,
Kentucky. Yes,
a good topic here. A bit more. Um, I'll say Civil War-ish, right? The
absolutely.
guerrillas are a well-known part of Kentucky's history during the Civil War. Um, so, where do we start?
Well, the guerrilla warfare aspect of the conflict has really gotten a lot of attention from historians since the 80s and 90s. Uh, Daniel Sutherland's book, A Savage Conflict, is considered one of the best. And you can tell by how well marked it is. I've been using that as a source for this proposed book of mine. And one that's been particularly helpful, The Guerrilla Hunters, which is edited by uh, Brian McKnight and Barton Myers. And there are several really excellent essays on guerrilla warfare in this study. And when we think of the Civil War in Kentucky, we think about Perryville, we think about John Hunt Morgan's raids. When we think about guerrillas, we talk about Sue Mundy and
Mhm.
Quantrell, who met his end in the Bluegrass State. But I think that Sue Mundy has really gotten more attention from historians than he deserves. And I think there are a lot of other partisans out there. Derek Lindow just came out with a
Yep.
great book on Adam R. Johnson's operations and partisan ranger operations in Western Kentucky. But we need to focus more attention on others like George M. Jesse, who operated in North Central Kentucky, Peter Everett, who operated in Northeastern Kentucky. But for the last 50 years, I've been researching the exploits of Algernon Sidney Cook, who was one of the foremost guerrilla chieftains in northeastern Kentucky. And so we're talking about a region that is roughly between Mount Sterling and Ashland, and then to the south, West Liberty. So that area of the state, a large part of Jesse Stewart country,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you will. The Licking River Valley was a major corridor for Confederate recruits coming from the interior of the state and entering the Confederate lines in southwestern Virginia. And the Little Sandy River Valley, which heads in Elliott County, present-day Elliott County, flows through Carter and Green up into the Ohio, is sort of the epicenter for Cook's activities. And what makes him unique is that with the outbreak of the war, most of the men who raised companies in that region, were officers in companies in that region, were men who held some type of local office. For instance, William Jason Fields of Carter County was the high sheriff, so he would eventually organize a company of partisan rangers. Leonidas H. Elliott, then Carter, now Elliott County, belonged to one of the wealthiest and most influential families of northeastern Kentucky. His brother, John Milton Elliott, had served in the United States Congress, and after the war broke out, would become a Confederate congressman. And so magistrates, attorneys, the professional class would all be leaders militarily at the outbreak of the war. Cook was a common laborer.
Hmm.
And when the conflict began, he was literally dirt poor, a man of no property at all. And so he emerged as a leader largely through his ruthlessness and his daring. He was born Algernon Sidney Lee in Russell County, Virginia in 1834, but he changed his name to Cook, his mother's maiden name, when he married about the year 1856. The woman he married was slightly older, and she had already borne three children out of wedlock. And my impression was is that she wasn't held in very high esteem. And my understanding is that the Lee family was very prominent in Russell County, Annabelle, Russell County, Virginia. This is located in the southeastern tip, just east of Cumberland
Mhm.
Gap. And so I suspect that might be why Cook changed his name. That he was sort of his wife was not respected and not welcome within the family. I also noted that shortly after his marriage, there were a couple of instances in Russell County where he was brought into court for assault and battery. So he got into a couple of violent conflicts with
Mhm.
neighbors. And not long after that, he immigrated from southwestern Virginia to northeastern Kentucky, settled in newly formed Boyd County near the community of Cannonsburg, and began, as I mentioned before, working as a common laborer. When the war broke out, he did not immediately rush to arms. But when John Hunt Morgan's command passed through Carter County and Morgan County in the fall of 1862, he enlisted in Morgan's cavalry in September. Now, at that time, Morgan was harassing the Union division that was retreating from Cumberland Gap at that time. Well, Cook was a private in Morgan's command, but when Morgan left the mountains and went back into the heart of the bluegrass, Cook deserted at Camp Dick Robinson in October of 1862 and made his way back to the Little Sandy region. After the Perryville campaign, uh, or I should say during the Perryville campaign, northeastern Kentucky was literally overrun with Confederate cavalry under the command of Brigadier General Humphrey Marshall, who commanded the Confederate forces on the Virginia-Kentucky border. And in the aftermath of that campaign, it became sort of payback time.
Uh,
Local Union men in the Little Sandy region formed home guard companies, and they began to raid into Morgan County and loot and pillage and arrest and kill Southern sympathizers and their families. So, in sometime in the early 1863, Sid Cook emerged as a Southern home guard leader. So, technically, at this point of the conflict, with just a handful of men, he was not a regularly enlisted Confederate soldier, and therefore anything he did was a violation of the Articles of War. But he continued to gather support. He was aided by David Cook, who is also known as Cloud Cook, and there was apparently no relation. He became Sid's first lieutenant. I've tentatively identified him as a ex-convict from Fleming County who was sentenced to a prison term in Montgomery County for horse stealing in the 1850s. And what's ironic is that in April of 1863, a party of Captain Fields's Rangers had arrested David Cook, and they took him into Grayson, the county seat, to turn him over to the authorities and collect a reward on him. However, home guards fired on them. And of course, many of them were already deep into whiskey at this point. And so they stopped outside of town. David Cook said he wanted revenge. One of the other members of the party, named Nathaniel Marks, said that he always swore he would burn Grayson to the ground if he was ever fired upon.
oh,
So this band of 8 or 9 men rode back to Grayson and went to the home of Joseph Young, an older man who lived on the outskirts of town, whose sons were all home guards. There was a firefight. The sons escaped out the back door. The old man remained in the house because he wanted to protect the house from being burned to the ground, and thought he would be able to uh, parley with Cook, Marks, and the others. And instead, Marks shot him dead and
Oh,
killed him. This is about April 8th, 1863. And Marks supposedly said afterwards that made one damn Yankee's heels fly up.
oh,
And so from this point on, why David Cook had passed the test, he didn't join Fields's command, which was operating in the area at the time, of course, but he did join Sid Cook's and became his right-hand man. Um, on April 28th, the Raiders returned. They burned the Carter County Jail and then rode east along, let's say, roughly speaking, present-day US 60 until they came to Star Furnace. One of the reasons why a lot of people were immigrating to northeastern Kentucky was the iron ore
yeah.
furnace industry was at full tilt. And Star Furnace was one of a few, Boone Furnace, Mount Savage Furnace in Carter County. And of course, every furnace had a company store and also a corral of horses and mules. And so I found this wonderful account by the son of the furnace owner. Years later, Robert Lambton was the furnace owner. He was a staunch Union man and would help recruit Union volunteers then and later during the war. But his son wrote, "I'd gone to sleep at night with stories of rebels and secession in my ears and was awakened about 6 a.m. by the aforesaid Rebs smashing in my door and proceeding to break up the furniture in my room. I got out of bed rapidly. I went out and stood in the yard under the trees. And when he went inside, he found, well, there they were, about 50 of them with guns and pistols and all about 2/3 drunk." He says, to say that they looked tough would be putting it very mild. So they plundered the store. They ran off all the horses. They took his father's watch and then galloped down the road back toward Grayson and then back into what's now the heart of present-day Elliott County. Another thing that historians are focusing on more these days, Civil War historians, has to do with how the terrain impacted warfare in particular regions. And present-day Elliott County was an ideal and became an ideal haven for guerrilla bands throughout the entire conflict. And there was an area north of the county seat called Cracker's Neck.
Oh,
And it was named after a hairpin turn in the Little Sandy River, sort of a peninsula on top of sheer sandstone cliffs that were, in some cases, about 200 feet high. And the road between Grayson and West Liberty, the county seat of Morgan County, ran through that narrow defile. And so it was an ideal defensive position. And so virtually all the raids that were undertaken by the so-called Crackers Neck guerrillas or the Morgan County guerrillas, because at that time, Sandy Hook was in Morgan County, emanated from this Crackers Neck gorge or defile, and virtually all the streams in Elliott County, Laurel, North Ruin, South Ruin, pour through narrow valleys with sharp cliffs on either side. So the farms in those areas became headquarters for a lot of the guerrilla bands, including Cook's. After the Star Furnace raid, the Cook's men continued to pillage, take horses from Union men in Morgan and Carter County all through the summer. During that summer, Oliver A. Patton of Covington obtained the commission to recruit a battalion of partisan rangers in northeastern Kentucky. So he entered Morgan County in June. He commissioned Sid Cook. He commissioned Dave Cook. And another officer who frequently rode with Cook, Samuel W. Thompson of Morgan County, to raise partisan ranger companies for his battalion. And so Cook has now transitioned from a bona fide guerrilla operating with no authorization to operating as a partisan ranger. And as you may know, this is a special unit of the Confederate Army that was designed to operate behind enemy lines. And in this particular instance, they were also authorized to keep any captured military equipment that they took, including horses,
Oh,
and sell them for their own profit. They didn't have to turn it over to a Confederate quartermaster.
mhm.
So in July of 1863, Patton's men raided Olive Hill, which is a small community between Grayson and Moorhead in Rowan County. And they plundered many of the Union families on the Upper Tiger Creek and retreated back into present-day Elliott County. Well, the Unionists in the Olive Hill area banded together into large numbers, and they followed Cook and Thompson into present-day Elliott County and found them camped on the John Bumgardner farm. And so on or about August 11th, 1863, occurred the epic clash in the Little Sandy region, which was known by locals from then till now as the Bumgardner fight. And so the home guards swooped down. I've been to the actual site of the farm. It's in a narrow bowl just below a steep ridge where Route 32 runs from Moorhead to Sandy Hook. And the Unionists swooped down the ridge. John Bumgardner picked up a rifle and opened fire, killing one of the home guards. Another home guard fired and killed John Bumgardner. John Bumgardner's young son, Robert, was wounded, and the Confederates were scattered to the winds. And so several were killed on both sides that day, but the exact details were not known. But this was so typical of the way the war would be waged. A lot of these partisans did not strike hard military targets. And so, again, they would strike furnace stores, county seats, and predominantly Union counties, and so forth. And then they would face retaliation by Union home guards. Cook was wounded in this skirmish in the leg, and on August 14th, he raided Boyd County and plundered some stores in near the neighborhood where he first settled when he first came to Virginia. But on September 2nd, 1863, Cook, Thompson, and John T. Williams, who was a very colorful, well-known partisan leader in Morgan County, raided down the Licking River Valley and plundered Flemingsburg. They emptied the stables. They robbed citizens on the streets. Sid Cook marched into the local bank and robbed it of over $500. And after that, they were gone. A few days later, on September 24th, 1863, David Cook and a portion of the Cook's Rangers now slipped into Ashland, Kentucky in the middle of the night and robbed the Ashland Bank there. So bank robbery was now added to their list of depredations. And technically, you could say that the banks were military targets because the sheriffs, the Union sheriffs in these counties and in other counties in Northeastern Kentucky, deposited the tax money they collected in the Ashland Bank. So, technically speaking, you could say that these bank robberies were military targets, but I think that the proceeds of the Flemingsburg robbery and the proceeds of the Ashland robbery ended up in the respective saddlebags of Sid and his right-hand man, David.
Yeah, well, that's what I kind of gather here. You know, they're acting without the guide of the Confederacy. They're just basically acting on their own, right?
Yes, absolutely. And what really complicated the matter was that Patton was captured during this time period. And so in August, September, October of 1863, and so he was captured once in August, escaped from Cincinnati, and then was captured again in the early fall. And so this battalion fell apart. And so Sam Thompson took his men to Pound Gap, Virginia in late summer, and he attached his company to the 10th Kentucky Mounted Rifles Battalion and became a regular soldier. And also about this time, Sid Cook took his men to Pound Gap and attached his company to the 7th Confederate Cavalry Battalion. And what made this unit different from other volunteer units in the Confederacy is that it was composed of men from different states. So it was a battalion composed partly of Kentucky companies and then of Virginia companies. And Cook's Kentucky company became Company G. So at this point, both Thompson and Sid Cook are regularly commissioned Confederate officers, but they soon returned to Northeastern Kentucky to their old haunts in the present-day area of Elliott County, and to continue to operate in the same sort of depredatory pattern as they had before. So even though they were regularly commissioned officers, they were still, plundering civilians, taking horses, that sort of thing. And on October 21st, Dave Cook decided that he had had enough of the war. He and his young wife attempted to board a steamboat at Greenup, Kentucky. They were recognized and confined in the military jail in Ironton, Ohio. And Cook apparently bribed the guard, and he asked if he could go to the outhouse one cold, rainy night. And when he came out of the outhouse, he had a pistol in each hand. And so he took the guard hostage. They crossed the Ohio River at Ashland in a skiff, stole some horses in a stable in Ashland, made their escape to Star Furnace. David tried to rob the furnace again, but a posse caught up with them, fired on them, and scared them off. And so David decided that he would rejoin his old command just in time for several weeks of a cat and mouse hit and run game with a Ohio unit headquartered at Flemingsburg, Kentucky, the 5th Ohio Independent Cavalry Battalion. And there are wonderful letters in the Columbus, Ohio newspaper from a member of the battalion that wrote detailed letters of the scouts they had against Cook, John T. Williams, and these Morgan County guerrillas. And in one letter, the writer said they rode into Moorhead in Rowan County and found that the county clerk, E.H. Logan, had just been mortally wounded by, quote, Cook's devils. And in November alone, Cook's men raided Moorhead over 4 times, each time taking prisoners, each time taking horses and property. The thing about Logan's death was that he was trying to enroll the recently reconstituted Union militia, and he had applied to be colonel of the Rowan County militia. That raid more or less brought all efforts to enroll militia in Rowan County to an end. And so while they didn't strike hard targets, Cook and his men, Thompson and others, wreaked havoc on the local government, law enforcement, and the local militia. No militia regiment could be raised in Morgan County, for that matter, during the war. One was raised in Carter County and would go on active duty. But these guerrilla raids were so prevalent that, at one point in the spring of 1864, 5 men refused to serve as magistrates in Rowan County because it was too dangerous. And the courthouse was burned by guerrillas in the spring of 1864. And no one was willing to serve as sheriff in Rowan County in 1863, again, largely because of Cook's activities. In early November, Cook's men went on a raid through Grayson, raiding from Olive Hill, or through Carter County, rather, raiding from Olive Hill to Grayson. They killed Deputy Provost Marshal William H. Tyree at his home in Olive Hill and escaped into Elliott County. Well, what happened after that was they had all of this plunder. And the plunder included a fine horse and a young black enslaved woman. And Sid and David had a strong disagreement in early November. And Sid settled it in a gentlemanly fashion by shooting David 3 times through the body and
Oh,
leaving him to die in a farmhouse
wow.
near Cracker's Neck, the place I described earlier.
Uh-huh.
And on November 11th, the 5th Ohio Patrol passed through and found David Cook, lying what they feared was mortally wounded. And they decided just to let him be and to let him die. Well, the Carter County Home Guards were not going to have that. So patrol came out of Olive Hill. They put Cook in a wagon and took him to Catlettsburg. He was eventually placed in the military hospital in Ashland. And then in early 1864, he was transferred to the Lexington military prison, where he was to be tried by a military commission for being a guerrilla, and particularly his role in the death of Provost Marshal Tyree. Well, he cheated the gallows. He died from disease in Lexington in
Ah,
1864, and he's buried. His name is mentioned on the monument in the Lexington Cemetery. Well, I'm sure Cook was saddened by the whole Sid Cook was saddened by the whole situation, but he fought on. He found a new first lieutenant and continued to raid in northeastern Kentucky through 1864. And at one point, when he was with the 7th Confederate Battalion in southwestern Virginia, he was reported to his commanding officer because he stole a Confederate woman's widow's horse at gunpoint. And this gave me pause because earlier in April of 1864, the 7th Confederate participated in a raid on Paintsville, and a Union woman was shot and killed by unknown guerrillas for refusing to give up her horse. And
mm,
while I can't prove it, my number one suspect would be Sid Cook. And again,
yeah.
the man was ruthless. In the summer of 1864, apparently without orders, Cook took his men back into northeastern Kentucky, left their camps in southwestern Virginia, and again went on a number of extensive raids. They killed 2 prominent Home Guard leaders in Morgan County, Lincoln Tom Caskey and Cap Tom Lewis, in the summer of 64. But they also plundered Paintsville on July 16th of 1864. The raid resulted in multiple post-war lawsuits with depositions by the people who were the victims of the raid, but also depositions by some of Cook's men. And it gave a really in-depth example of what this moonlight raid was
Mhm.
like. And again, most of these raids took place at night. So Cook and his men were largely night riders. They plundered the stores, took off with as many horses as they could, and disappeared into Morgan County. By late fall, Cook was back in southwestern Virginia, where he was placed under arrest and charged with desertion. And while he was
Oh,
waiting trial, his entire company deserted in November of 64 and went back to the Little Sandy region, and led by Neil McClanahan, they virtually carried on the same type of operations that Cook had been carrying on since the spring of 1863, all through the early part of 1865. Cook, as I said, was awaiting trial. He went to part of the 7th Confederate was camped near Castle Woods, which was in Russell County, Cook's hometown. And while he was waiting trial, Cook gathered a few of the men in the area, and he went on a plundering expedition in the old neighborhood where he was born and raised. And he robbed several Confederate civilians of clothing, bedsteads, and other valuable property, horses, I'm sure, brought it back to Castle Woods. And all of this plunder was designed to make Castle Woods the Vegas of southwestern Virginia. So they opened up brothels, drinking establishments, and all that sort of thing. And the citizens got together with a Confederate officer by the name of Robert Cleveland Boyd, who was an officer in the 34th Virginia Cavalry Battalion, and they confronted Cook in Castle Woods. And on January 13th, 1865, Cook was shot to death by a fellow Confederate officer on the streets of Castle Woods. Neil McClanahan, as I said, would gain every much a bloody reputation as Cook did. He would continue his depredations well into the spring of 1865. But finally, an enslaved man in Morgan, now Elliott County, was sent by his master to Grayson. And this character is an interesting character, Black Jim Howard, because his owner was a Union man, and Black Jim often rode with Union Home Guards on their raids during the conflict. In this instance, he was a messenger. He went to Grayson, told the Home Guards there that Neil McClanahan was holed up at the home of a lewd woman on Devil's Fork in present-day Elliott County. The home was surrounded. McClanahan begged for his life, but they reminded him that they would show him as much mercy as he showed Lincoln Tom Caskey and Cap Tom Lewis, and they shot him dead on the spot.
Wow.
But it really doesn't end here. And so it's not only a study, the book not only is intended to bring to life what guerrilla warfare was actually like, front door warfare, round the clock warfare in this part of Kentucky. But it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that Elliott County, which was formed in 1869, Rowan County, and Carter County would become the most violent hotspots in Kentucky from 1865 to the late 1880s.
Yeah.
And so immediately after the Civil War, a band of Union Home Guards formed by the Underwood family of Olive Hill became the nucleus of one of the most active horse stealing rings in northeastern Kentucky. And so from 1865 until 1879, various members of the family led horse stealing raids between West Virginia and Fleming and Bath County and Rowan County, and would steal horses in Kentucky, sell them in Ohio, steal horses in Ohio, sell them in Kentucky, and all the while have serious reminiscent of Civil War skirmishes with local law enforcement and state militia. So finally, in 1879, a band of vigilantes arose and literally exterminated the entire Underwood clan. Only a few of them managed to escape and make their way west. Also in 1879, in Elliott County, there had been an extensive crime wave going on there all through the 1870s. In 1877, a band of youths, a small band of outlaws, burned the county seat to the ground because the town fathers were trying to bring them to justice. And so in the aftermath of that, there was also a band of outlaws operating out of, no surprise, Cracker's Neck, that robbed stores, stole horses and cattle all through that same area of Elliott, Rowan, and Carter County. So vigilantes formed in Elliott County, and from there it expanded into multiple counties in northeastern Kentucky, a vigilante uprising that lasted till 1882, in which at least three alleged outlaws were lynched, and there were pitched gun battles between the vigilantes and others they deemed as ne'er-do-wells in their community. Once this ended in 1882, the Rowan County War erupted not long after that in the 1880s. And for my money, you can talk about the Hatfields and McCoys all you want to. There's nothing, no feud in Kentucky compares to the Rowan County War. And what these men learned in that particular war, post-war war, what they learned from the Underwoods learned and what outlaws learned was that a band of a dozen heavily armed men could rob and steal and plunder at will. And if there is a rugged remote area like Elliott County, they could disappear into that region, largely with a population that supported them during the war and would continue to serve as spies and hideouts for them after the war, and almost defy the law with impunity. And so
Mhm.
the Rowan County War ended up ending due to vigilantism
Yeah.
because the state militia couldn't stop it, local law enforcement couldn't stop it, and so Daniel Boone Logan uh, went to Cincinnati, ordered a lot of Winchester rifles, and there was a major gun battle on the streets of Moorhead. I want to say 1887,
Mhm.
1888, in which the Tolliver faction, they were pro-Southern residents of Morgan County during the Civil War, was virtually wiped out. And so, again, the activities of Cook, Sam Thompson, John T. Williams, and others had no major strategic impact on the war, but they sowed like dragon's teeth
Yeah.
all of this violence and all of this lawlessness that would last for more than a generation
Yeah.
after the conflict ended.
Yeah. That's it's very interesting too, because like when you lay it all out, I almost feel like yes, they were Southern, but almost more opportunistic than
Yeah,
anything. Like they're not really going by anything the Confederates are telling them to do. They're just acting on their own will, pillaging and using the war as their way of doing whatever they want. You know.
yeah. From a Confederate standpoint, it's I'm trying to think how to phrase it. It was a real blow for Oliver Patton to be captured because he planned to form this battalion into a cohesive force, and he was going to strike hard targets, including river traffic on the Ohio River from Ashland to Maysville. And of course, that never happened. So these bands went back to being what they had originally been, more or less Southern home guards fighting Union home guards. And so it's an extremely localized war. And they believed that they were fighting for the Southern cause, just like the home guards believed they were fighting for the Northern cause. But they felt that both armies could not protect them. And so they took it upon themselves. And, eventually it devolved into anarchy and chaos and where anything goes. You could kill prisoners, you could pistol whip women. I've run across an account of that by some of McClanahan's men. Uh, so it was really a brutal, nightmarish struggle that cast a pall over that region of the state for many, many years.
Yeah, and again to go back, like he was with Morgan, right? And
What was that again?
Cook was with Morgan to begin with, right?
Briefly. Yes,
Yeah, and then
briefly.
he's like, well, I'm gonna just desert, and I'm gonna do the same thing, only for my
Yeah,
own. Because
I forget the name of this particular historian, but it was an essay in Why the South Lost, a book that came out many years ago. And he said localism was a major problem. And what he meant by that was, well, a great example was Humphrey Marshall's little brigade based on the Kentucky-Virginia border. The Kentuckians didn't want to be based in Virginia. They wanted to remain in Kentucky. And the Virginians didn't want to go into Kentucky. They wanted to remain in Virginia. And so you see the same thing with these guerrilla bands or partisan bands in Northeastern Kentucky and elsewhere in the state, actually, in which they would say, I haven't left the Confederacy. The Confederacy has left me and my family. So I'm not going to go and fight for Virginians and Tennesseans.
mhm.
I'm going to stay here and protect my family and wreak vengeance against those wronged them, harmed them, and plundered them. So it's really true civil war when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah,
You see
and
the same thing in the Revolution in the South. You see the same thing in the civil wars in England, and you see the same thing with the Elizabethan border reivers in the 16th century. Bands of our men on either side of the Anglo-Scottish border who just lived by raiding back and forth across the border and plundering each other. And because neither of the crowns of Scotland or England were powerful enough to exert control over the border, so essentially Elliott County was like a borderland that these
Mhm.
rival raiding bands of anywhere of a dozen to 30 to 50 at the most would raid back and forth.
Mhm. Uh, yeah, and the same. I mean, even with the Sue Monday and which Morgan was on Confederate orders, right, to go and raid, or was he?
Yes.
Yes, and then but then everybody else is pretty much just doing it on their own. Um, but do you think Sue Monday is more recognized than say Cook and these other ones just from the newspaper and
Yes. Well, he was a newspaper or media celebrity in his own lifetime. And, I mean, if you read Kentucky's wartime newspapers, there are references to a lot of other really formidable guerrilla chieftains throughout the state. But Mundy is the best known, I think, largely
Mhm,
because of how George D. Prentice, the editor of the Louisville Journal, used Mundy as a foil against the Kentucky Departmental Commander, Stephen Burbridge. In other words, like, our state is overrun with guerrillas. Why aren't you doing more about it? It's so bad that a woman is now
mhm, doing it.
leading a guerrilla band, and you can't even catch this woman, even though, of course, Marcellus Jerome Clark was a young man who just happened to, excuse me, wear long hair.
Mhm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's a pretty good, pretty interesting stuff how it all plays out across the state. Kentucky was by far a divided state.
As I've used the analogy before, but it really was a like a crazy woman's quilt, because in the Little Sandy region, Greenup County was largely pro-union. Carter County was largely pro-union, but immediately on the southern border of Carter, Morgan County was predominantly pro-Confederate. And so here you have these two neighboring counties with two diametrically opposing views, right next to each other. And
Mhm.
so there are all kinds of references by Union men to the Morgan County rebels, Morgan County raiders, all that sort of thing through the conflict. I think one the Union provost marshal for that area, I think, if I remember correctly, called Morgan County the South Carolina of
Oh.
that part of Kentucky. So
Oh, that's pretty good.
the most help of all were civil and criminal court records. And there were multiple war related suits filed against men who rode with Cook that survived the war. Cook was indicted in multiple counties during the war, but with his death and David Cook's death and the death of other members of his command, why only those who survived and who happened to have a fairly good sized farm would find themselves the subject of civil damages or criminal acts during the war. Many of these criminal acts were dismissed, of course, but the depositions give details. They identify members of the raiding party, and so I've been able to compile a pretty good roster for Cook's Devils.
Well, that's good, and, well, whenever you get that book good and sent out and on the presses, you'll need to come back on and, talk some more about it 'cause,
Oh, I'd love to. Love
uh,
to.
yeah, well, if there's anything else on your plate that you, wanna talk about or got coming up or
I can't remember whether we've talked about the Underwoods or the what one Kentucky newspaper called the Horse Thief War after the war that raged from 1865 to 1879. If we haven't talked about that, I'll have to check my files. Uh,
I believe we have.
to say that I'll move on to maybe locating the talk I have on the Kentuckians who served with the filibusters in Cuba and Nicaragua in the 1850s.
Yeah, that would be pretty good. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, if need be, I'll just recreate that talk from scratch.
There you go. There you go. Mr. Pritchard, thanks for joining us again, and we'll have you on again soon. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.